ProCognita, Get Agile podcast. What are the product owner key skills? Interview with Gojko Adzic.
Hi, I'm Tomasz Wykowski from ProCognita, and today I have a pleasure with meeting with Gojko Adzic, an author of several books, including Impact Mapping, including 50 quick ideas to improve your user stories, including running serverless, including specification by example, plus the consultant, plus the entrepreneur, plus the trainer. Did I miss anything?
Probably not. I think that's fine, yeah.
All right, that's good for the beginning. So you're here for the product owner key skill training. So let's start with the product owner key skills. What are these?
I think in lots of organizations, product owners are basically today in a very unfortunate position where for many organizations, basically they took people who are business analysts before, gave them the product owner role, but didn't really tell them what to do differently. So in many situations, these people just continue doing business analysis. They don't actually take responsibility for the product because they don't know how to do that. I think one of the most important skills for a product owner is to be able to actually drive the direction of a product and know how to look, whether this thing is going the right direction or not.
So can a former business analyst do that? Or can you give them the skills?
Anybody can learn how to do that. Okay. Whether people with business analysis skills are more inclined to do that or not, that's a really interesting question. I don't know. I think in many organizations that's kind of a logical transition because business analysts were people responsible for kind of bridging the gap between the market, the clients and the developers, and kind of this is a slightly more responsible role. They're just not responsible for analysis, but they're more responsible for setting the direction of the product.
And the business value.
And the business value.
So the key skills again, so what they need to learn when I move from the business analyst to the product ownership, what I need to learn?
I think one of the most important things they need to learn is how to define value and how to then help the team define what they can do to meet that value and how to measure value on a shorter time scale, because everybody can measure value 6 months after something is delivered or a year after something is delivered and then conclude, yes, this was a wonderful idea, or no, this was a stupid idea. But a key responsibility for a product owner or product manager is to figure out how do we decide that a week after we deliver so we know what direction we need to go into, and then help all the various stakeholders agree where to go next, or even start taking more responsibility for the actual direction of the product.
And you're saying this is a skill, so something you can develop rather than like a, given from the moment you're born.
Absolutely, I think people can learn that, and it's important for people to learn this. It's important for us to learn these things from how people build successful products, and there's lots and lots of knowledge about that on the market. I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, product management in software was really a rare skill and a rare responsibility. And there were these, consultants or people doing really good products emerging on the market. And we had, 4 steps to Epiphany. We had build, measure, learn later, and lots of these techniques that evolved. But I think when Scrum came about, product owner as a role wasn't really well defined. It was somewhere up in the air. When XP kind of defined the XP customer role was pretty much everything that is not a developer responsibility. It was kind of defined by developers as everything we don't know how to do. Product owners, kind of in Scrum, product owners actually were better defined, but then again, it was it the actual owner of a product or not? In early Scrum products, they were product driven, and the product owner owned the product. And then we started applying Scrum to organizations where the product owner is somebody who's in the middle of the organization. They're not a CEO, they're not a CFO, they report to other stakeholders. Sometimes, or very often, it wasn't their financial responsibility for the product. And in many cases, they were completely lost.
So this is about the role, or it's about that we wrongly try to put the responsibility for people who just cannot do it, and they don't have rights in the organization to do those changes, to make those decisions.
Well, that's one case, but also like in many failed large-scale agile implementations, people got the responsibility, but they did not get the authority to do it. They were given, you are now a product owner, but they were not given the authority to make product decisions. They were basically expected to take orders from the business or the clients. And, it's very difficult to be given the responsibility but not the authority. And that happened in many cases.
This is what I'm saying. You have a business analyst, they are called product owner, they still have no authority, they cannot make any decision except refine the user story better.
And which is an analysis task, which is not an ownership task. I think kind of Larman in his book on Scaling Lean and Agile defined that the primary responsibility for a product owner is prioritization. It's steering the direction, it's not analysis. One of the key differentiators between teams that do Scrum well or not do it well was that the analysis became the responsibility of the team. And the product owner's responsibility was to steer that. And I think that's a very, very important point where if you have somebody whose last 20 years job was to refine things, to analyze them, and now you're giving them the role of ownership and steering without additional skills, without additional knowledge, without additional authority, they will just keep doing whatever they used to do, call it ownership.
Yeah. So one thing you said earlier is like we're getting better with some of this product ownership as we move into the lean startup concept, Scrum, and all this product development. From the other hand, is like so many projects failing. So how do we differentiate this? So you think about the product owners of the companies which have a success. What they do differently from the other companies.
I think kind of. One book I really like about that, it's not a software book at all, is 4 Disciplines of Execution. I think it's a fantastic book, people should read it, and it does not bring anything revolutionary new to people who know Scrum, but it provides terminology to explain these things in a wonderful way. And that's why I like it, although it's not a software book. They talk about 4 things that successful organizations tend to do very, very differently from unsuccessful ones. The first discipline of execution they talk about is focus on stuff that's really, really important. They call it wildly important. The second thing they talk about is measure leading indicators and find leading indicators that you can kind of guide yourself with.
So not the one that you have 6 months later.
But not the one that you have 6 months later. The third discipline is figure out a way to show the progress. They call that build a scoreboard, visualize that. And the last one is get a cadence where you can get this kind of accountability for the team. So if you look at Scrum has a cadence.
Yeah.
In this cadence, we should have a measurement of progress.
And we have a transparency. So
and we should have transparency, but how people measure progress is totally insane.
Yes.
We measure progress by focusing on measurements of effort, like story points. We measure the number of stories delivered, which is basically, again, effort. It's a measurement of how much more complicated we've made our product. It's not a measurement of what we delivered. And for a lot of people there, you can immediately see they do not have a way to focus on what's wildly important because there is no way of describing value. And we do not have any leading indicators of value. And that's kind of the big problem.
And you end up with everything being important.
You end up with everything being important. You end up with everything being priority one. And you end up with these big backlogs that are completely unfocused.
Yeah, and you ask the question, what is important? And they tell you yes.
So if we look at the definition of the product owner being able to steer, that means the product owner must know how to focus on what's wildly important and must know whether what they think is going okay is actually going okay. Marty Cagan, in Inspired, another fantastic book, said that the number one mistake for product managers is thinking they represent the user. It's thinking that their decisions are the decisions that the user would make or what's important for them. So these 2 things that are missing, discipline 1, focus on important stuff, and discipline 2, figure out a way how to measure whether you're getting there or not with leading indicators, I think that's the key gap that product owners need to have today.
Yeah, just a thought for observers that we most likely need to list all those books that you're mentioning, because otherwise.
And we will, yes.
Yeah, that's gonna be.
I tend to fly a lot, have a lot of downtime to read books on airplanes.
Which is cool. So let's go back to those product owners. So what you say, like they need to focus on the value. So what is the biggest challenge those people have? So like in the product owner role, what is the biggest challenge?
So one of the challenges I see is how do we define value that reflects the next 2 weeks of work? Not the previous 3 years of work, not the next 6 months of work, but the next 2 weeks of work. And one model that I like quite a lot, and this model is mentioned in 4 Disciplines of Execution, it's mentioned in Anthony Ulwick's What Customers Want, it's mentioned in a bunch of other things, is looking at the behavior change of users, the behavior change of stakeholders as a way, and kind of the change in how they do work. If you use jobs to be done, then the change in the way how those jobs are achieved as a way of measuring value. Because we can observe changes in people's behavior very short after we try to influence it. We don't have to observe it on the entire population. We can observe it with a trial group of users. We can observe it with somebody attempting to do something different and proving that yes, they can or cannot. We can observe it by using analytics in production on larger groups of people. And more importantly, if we define a change in somebody's behavior as a way of delivering value, then we do not have to go all the way there. We just need to create a positive change in the right direction. So one of the fundamental questions that people will need to answer is, are we going in the right direction? And for that, we need to define a direction. If you look at a typical user story as a blah blah in order to blah blah on blah blah, the middle part that usually describes value describes the type of work people want to do. Most of the time it's a type of work. In order to book a trade, in order to purchase books, in order to complete payments or something like that, it does not describe a direction. It does not describe a change in that type of work. So
like a 0-1, like a digital and
0-1, shorter, faster. So I strongly recommend, dear listeners and dear kind of audience, if you have a user story that says, in order to purchase something, figure out a change in that type of purchase. How differently will people purchase after you deliver the story? Purchase faster, purchase easier, purchase more successfully. And as soon as you have that, then you can describe the magnitude of the change. 10% faster, 50% faster. And then, as long as we move it, we don't have to get 50% faster, let's get 5% faster. It's already valuable.
And so we get back to the situation when the product owner need to be able to make this decision. And there's one thing more that I want to stress out, something that Craig is saying is you need to define the product from the customer perspective, because too many organizations are defining the product like from the component perspective. And then the user is basically the second system. And then how do you define the value in this case?
Absolutely. So I think, first of all, products need to be defined in the context of the problem they're trying to solve, or the challenge they're trying to solve, the benefit they're trying to bring. And then we need to figure out what is the right solution for that. Far too often people are obsessed about a solution, not about the problem they're trying to solve. And I think figuring this out, figuring out the relationship between the solution we have intended to build and the problem we're trying to solve, is one of the biggest challenges that products have faced forever, but in particular with kind of things we do now with short iterations, defining this link between what we're doing one day, 1 week or something like that, and how that solves this wider problem becomes kind of the critical thing to do. When I was reading and learning about software architecture, I remember reading this book written by Michael Jackson, not the singer, of course. There's a famous software architect called Michael Jackson, and he was writing about problem frames. And his statement in the book about problem frames is that the biggest challenge for architecture is figuring out the mapping between a problem machine and a solution machine, which is kind of, the same problem we have today. So I think that's why behavior change is such powerful concepts, because we can use them to kind of link between deliverables, ideas that we have, and kind of the larger goals of the organization by creating these behavior changes. If we can get people to purchase more successfully, this will lead to more revenue. And kind of then we can have measurements on all these levels. We can express by hypothesis through a hierarchy of values.
And solving problem, not delivering features.
Absolutely, solving the problem, not delivering features.
When despite 20 or 30 years of so-called Agile, is like we still have 50-70% of the feature having no value at all, being delivered, right? So we're pretty good on this one, still.
I think there's a big problem there where moving to very close customer collaboration brought lots of amazing benefits, but it also brought the fact that everybody can have an opinion what's a good software feature. And lots of teams have moved into this horrible model that's called the feature factory, where the clients are dictating features, the teams are implementing it, and everybody's happy because we're doing what the clients told us they want. Unfortunately, these people are not software designers. These people have their own skills, their own kind of business they're doing. Their business is not designing software. Their business is not to know what exact feature needs to be built. So close customer collaboration is amazing, but we need to collaborate on the right level. We need to get kind of a better understanding of the problems people have, their ideas, and to translate that into features. Now, I'm not advocating going back to business analysis, big plans up front, but what I think we need to do is more people need to learn about UX research. More people need to learn about the techniques that have been developed by UX people, by kind of product management, and then we need to apply these techniques when we communicate with customers, not taking every silly request for granted, but trying to understand the reasoning behind those requests and actually devise a solution that meets their problem, not necessarily implement what they told us to implement.
Yeah, so asking why, what is the problem?
Asking why is nice, but asking why,
what? Basically. Asking
why very often leads to because I want it. But the asking why in many different ways. Yeah. Chris Matz, a friend of mine who's done a lot of work in business analysis and was instrumental to kind of creating BDD, has a post where he has 20 different ways to ask why. Like, how would this be useful? What would be different if we deliver this? I like to talk about pretend it's magic and we deliver it. How would your work change? Because then we can figure out the actual difference there and try to meet that.
And then we have all the skills of observing the users in their real environment and getting this and getting the feedback on the why they're trying to do something, using the system the way you would never thought that they could use your system this way. So I'm going back a little bit into those priorities again. So we had a conversation before, like, okay, let's figure out what is important. But you go to the large organization, then you get this everything is important. You have a competing requirements, competing needs. Even if we talk about on the need level, like solving the problem, then you still hear that this problem is a big one and this is a big one and we need to solve this one. What to do about this one?
So, one of the most powerful buttons that a product owner can push, and even if they are not C-level, which they very rarely are, so they're somewhere in the middle of the organization, so it's not there to own the budget, it's very often not even there to own the scope. In an ideal scenario, that should be that. Hopefully, as the industry moves towards that, more product owners will get the responsibility to actually own the scope. In many cases, they do not, unfortunately, but sequence is something they can push. I think rather than talking about what is important, what is not important, people should think about now or not now, or yes and yes but later. Many product management books talk about this same button, this same technique in many different ways. Don Reinertsen talks about it in Flow as cost of delay. What do we do first? What do we postpone for later? So I strongly suggest that kind of product owners, when they have conversations with stakeholders, do not talk about yes or no. Do not talk about what's more or less important, because everything is going to be important.
Yes.
Every time I've seen a must, should, could, 90% was a must. Instead, what we should talk about is what do we do first? What do we do after? And again, ordering features like that becomes really, really problematic, but ordering value, ordering behavior changes becomes much easier.
Might be easier.
So we can talk about, should we first help people to purchase more successfully, or should we focus on bringing more users to the product and kind of growing and getting people to sign up easier and things like that? And you know, there is a logical progression of these things, and then that's going to influence software features and software ideas. So another kind of really, really important note there, and I think that's probably the second most important product owner skill, is figure out a way how to discuss the sequence, talk about now and not now, yes and yes but later, what do we do first, what do we do next, and organize a sequence of these smaller problems to solve that lead to the bigger thing that needs to be solved. I mentioned Chris Matz. Chris is the person who taught me this technique, and I used to call it Chris Matz prioritization, but after a session in China where my broken English and their broken English mingled, there was a person in the audience who said, you know, I didn't understand this Christmas prioritization. I thought that's absolutely brilliant, and I stopped calling it Chris Matz prioritization. I call it Christmas prioritization now, because I think when we talk to stakeholders, we can say, look, at the end of this thing, you know, large organization, large project, 3 years from now, you will get these 15 presents. But you don't have to wait for this thing at the end to get the first present. Instead of one big Christmas at the end, we can organize a sequence of Christmases, but we need to prioritize the presents. So if you could choose one of these to open next month, which one would that be? And that's kind of a really, really important skill for product owners to take.
And that is how Chris Matz became the Santa Claus for this one.
Yes, Chris Matz is the Santa Claus for this one.
All right, so the final question, because as ProCognita we're having a 10 years anniversary this year. So my question for you would be like, if you look at the product ownership, product development for the last 10 years, for the last decade, what is the difference? What are the patterns you can see?
I think one of the things that became possible that was not as possible for many companies before is to observe users much, much easier. We have better tools and better observability as most users have moved kind of online. Most products have moved online. We can do, or many more companies can do things like A/B testing. Many more companies can do gradual deployments. Many more companies can do gentle deployments, as Marty Cagan calls it, where we give people the opportunity to try out a new version, monitor the differences, take that in. There are many, many more products to record sessions, to observe this stuff, which makes it possible to do this thing at a larger scale. Now, of course, you know, this brings lots of privacy concerns as well, and we know how analytics and GDPR clash very often, but I think being able to do this stuff at scale and in production that cost a lot more money before is one of the biggest differences we have. Another thing that's become possible is running lots of smaller experiments, because infrastructure became much cheaper because of the cloud. Creating different copies of production became much cheaper. I think product owners who can use that for benefit can start running circles around the competition now.
Yeah, so basically, if you don't test your ideas, if you don't, you know, check the data, then basically you're not in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thanks for taking your time for having a conversation.
Thank you very much for the nice
chat. Thank you very much, and thank you
guys
for
Bye-bye.
us. Thank you.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.